我做事情，我奋斗，我挣钱。
We have the people, we have the talent, we have the audience, we have everything we need to hit the floor running.
好，多謝，身體健康啊，身體健康。
那好了，我们跟你过100岁生日的呀。
很开心啊！
勇敢，我的朋友。
疫情渐趋平稳，各地复工复产不断提速，
超过了疫情之前的最高峰的时候吧。
This is the first pandemic caused by a coronavirus.
Variant Alpha, Beta, Gamma,
Omicron.
近3年来，我们不断调整优化防控措施，
创造了人类文明史上人口大国成功走出疫情大流行的奇迹。
现在疫情放开了，然后我就要每天多努力一点。
This year is going to be the year of rebound and recovery.
The year of the rabbit has arrived. This is the first Chinese New Year since the response to COVID-19 was downgraded to Class B. It has been 3 years since the initial COVID-19 outbreak in Wuhan. Now, people across China are putting the pandemic behind them. Life is returning to normal. The hustle and bustle has returned sooner and with more vigor than anyone imagined. Southwest China is the location of Asia's largest wholesale flower market. In early December 2022, when China loosened its COVID policies, this was one of the first places to feel the change.
可能大家有一些消费的就憋久了，这个鲜花的恢复呢，还是算比较快的。元旦一过以后，出来一个井喷式的一个增长，鲜花的量也出来了，价也上起来了。 到现在为止吧，每天的交易量已经超过2500万只，超过了疫情之前的最高峰的时候吧。
我的名字叫李丽，我卖的花了嘛，特别多，特别杂，几乎整个斗南市场上所有品类的花我都卖。我主推的都是应季花材。 我开播啦，7788，你每次都来的最早，每次都是你来的最早。这个花要卖给我们的老大姐，好不容易淘到2捆这么好的花，跟美。这一捆花头全部一样大的，然后杆子大长腿实心杆。现在直播间的情况就是，如果一天播到6个7个小时的话，进进出出的这种流量应该会达到10万以上。 一般情况的同时在线的人数就是500、600个人同时在线，就是相当于我去市场上有随时都有500、600个人跟着我一起逛。现在疫情放开了，快递不拖后腿了，然后我就要每天多努力一点，每个月少休息2天，保持每个月都是旺季，每个月都有一个情人节。这是我们的那个。 新品，这是我们的新品粉罗拉，漂亮吧？我做事情，我奋斗，我挣钱，就是为了他们2个。
This is a major flower distribution center in Guangzhou.
有冇得平啲啊？
得啦，人哋要咗啦。得。
Hu Jianlong, a 34-year-old Guangzhou native, runs a flower stall. He's making purchases for the upcoming Spring Festival flower market.
剑南我买了，其实不够，远远不够，预算是800到900。
It's a Spring Festival custom in Guangdong Province for a family to visit a flower market, buy flowers, and then take a pre-holiday stroll.
逛花街是我们老馆过年必备的一个节目，没有了这个逛花街，我没有了这个卖花，这一年我就感觉不是太完整了。
The century-old Westlake Flower Market in the old part of the city is the largest of its kind in Guangzhou. After 2 years of being closed due to the pandemic, the 3-day event has restarted. But there was widespread uncertainty about whether the flower market would continue to prosper. He Jinlong seized the opportunity to secure 2 stalls.
老細賺個開市好微嘅咋啲利潤。好，多謝晒，身體健康啊，身體健康。
And his gamble has paid off. A sign of how good business has been is the hoarseness of his voice.
而且今年我想采购的量是特别大，比往年多了大概50%左右。现在就剩下这么一些，基本上售卖完毕。
It's Spring Festival Eve, and the Westlake Flower Market is crowded. In the course of 3 days, a total of 1.5 million people have visited the 400-meter-long streets.
蔡叔，我是小峰啊，没事了啊。
3 kilometers away from the flower market is the first affiliated hospital of Sun Yat-sen University. With nearly 200 ICU beds, it has one of China's largest and best-equipped intensive care units. Dr. Wu Jianfeng and his colleagues are treating the last few COVID-19 cases. Most are in their 80s and ready to be transferred to a regular ward.
我们说了，约好了，我们跟你过100岁生日的呀，对不对？你离100岁还有10年呢。
我一有意等着就等到现在，等现在没家业。
哎呀，不会，你还可以见至少10年以上的啊。现在很多都是在慢慢好转。我们 ICU 是生命重生的地方，就是说我们是要让他活，对吧？要让病人活。
In an ICU, hope and heartbreak go hand in hand. For medical workers like Wu Jianfeng, sometimes it's necessary to risk their own lives to save others. On the eve of Spring Festival 2020, Dr. Wu arrived in Wuhan, which was being devastated by a terrifying unknown killer. He was among the first medical personnel sent to assist the city in its battle against the disease.
我1月24号当时接到通知，然后马上就是2个小时之后接通知，晚上必须出发，然后就去医院去集合了，然后就开始坐飞机，凌晨的飞机到达武汉。我记得还非常清楚，应该是凌晨3点钟左右。
The novel coronavirus that appeared in Wuhan in 2019 was far more virulent and lethal than the current Omicron strain. Back then, the 60,000 medical workers in Wuhan were stretched to breaking point.
忙不过来，从来没见过这种架势呀，这种阵势。一个病人后面跟着一排病人，一个圈的病人，看着就有一点绝望的感觉到不了头。24小时不停的，还是有打不完的病人。
开始的时候，我跟他们一样也是失眠，你只要睡着，你就梦里面就全部是这些患者的那些影像在你大脑里面。
这单元里面是最重的病人啊，抢救的病人啊，都是有气管插管的啊。
只要一张床空出来了，哪怕是那个床上的遗体还没抬走，就已经开始人来预定这个床位了，就到这样的程度。
Then, on January the 20th, the new coronavirus was recognized as an infection on a par with bubonic plague and cholera, triggering mechanisms under Chinese law mandating mass quarantine. This remained the situation for the next 3 years.
把它列为法定报告传染病一类，按强烈管理，它就给武汉封城提供了一个法律基础。
Also on January the 20th, President Xi Jinping issued a series of instructions regarding the battle against the novel coronavirus. He said that people's lives and health were the priority and that the efforts to contain the spread of the virus should be resolute and unstinting. He also stressed the importance of prompt information sharing and enhanced international cooperation. The rest is history. Wuhan was placed under lockdown, a city of 10 million people. Such a move was unprecedented.
自2020年1月23号10点起，全市城市公交、地铁、轮渡、长途客运暂停。
The whole country was mobilized to help Wuhan. Urgent supplies and more than 42,000 medical workers were rushed into the beleaguered city from across China.
养兵千日，用兵一时，回来只是显身手。
我们要提前的预判，打出一部分提前量来，然后呢，能够保证它快速的这个调动。我觉得这些其实都是非常。另外就是我们国家的一个制度的优势和体制的优势了。就我们国家是公立院主体的，就公立院是主体的话，我们可以随时的来调派这些医院。
每一个医护人员心里都会有这样的担忧，对吧？ 就是担忧在这个治疗过程中间，对吧？有没有可能会被感染？个人的看法就是什么？就是说，把这个更多的是一种责任，我觉得应该是这样。救治病人，救治重症病人，那就是我们该做的事情。如果这个事情我不做，那我说句不好听话，那我连吃饭的这个资本都没有了，对吧？
But even China's finest medical minds seemed helpless in the face of this unknown enemy.
我们那会儿去武汉，还真是不了解这个，一点都不了解，不知道这个病毒是什么特点，也不知道它会在武汉那么厉害。就是大家可能对武汉记忆很深刻，病人都很重，都是比较严重的呼吸衰竭，都要上呼吸机，都要上 ECMO。 这个比例是很高的。
At the beginning of 2020, China, a country of 1.4 billion people, had just 63,000 ICU beds. The danger was obvious. If the virus got a grip nationwide, the whole medical system might soon collapse. The tragedy of Wuhan would be repeated across the country. But thanks to China's rigorous COVID policies, a national disaster was averted. Ceiling strips and water-filled barricades are a special part of the nation's past 3 years of shared memories. Such as in this neighborhood, home to almost 5,000 residents. Community workers use barricades to seal off 3 apartment blocks to prevent the spread of the outbreak. Tian Ling was in charge of community service work.
发烧、干咳等疑似症状，请拨打120。
怎么了？这是又？
他要把这个违章撤了，继续，就是我不让他撤，就骂我的工作人员。
他要从这儿过去。
对，我们不是全封堵了吗？还不可，他非要去拆违章，他要出去。
Confrontations like this were not uncommon. Some residents at first failed to appreciate the importance of the strict community lockdown measures. Since the initial outbreak in Wuhan, early detection, early reporting, early isolation, and early treatment have become key principles for China in dealing with COVID. Anyone confirmed as infected had to be isolated and treated immediately. Blocking community transmission was a vital measure in preventing the spread of COVID-19. Community workers and volunteers were tasked with buying essential supplies for lockdown residents.
社区小超市今天开张啊，品种大家自己看，有所需要的通过电话或者在微信平台里面来跟我们提供需求。 我就发到我的内部工作群里面，然后通过我的网格员就发到各个群里面。
花姐也马上回来，你干脆在旁边等一下。
什么都找他，什么事情解决没吃没喝的都找他们。对啊，他们天天从过年前到现在都是在为我们那些社区的居民的工作，我们真的很感恩，很感谢，真的非常感谢你，真的辛苦了，真的不容易，真的不容易，谢谢你。你看我们什么困难都要找你们，什么吃的喝的没有用的都要找你们，谢谢你，谢谢啊，辛苦了辛苦了，真的他很委屈的。这个疫情是谁都不会想，我们作为公民就应该配合人家，他们真的很辛苦的，他没有生命安全吗？他不是父母的子女吗？对不对？你不能要求的太苛刻了，对吧？我们都应该配合人家。
Community lockdowns, PCR testing, makeshift hospitals. These measures, first tried in Wuhan, proved to be the most effective.
武汉实现零新增，给了全世界希望。
从今天开始，恢复汉口、武昌、武汉3大火车站始发的42条公交线路。
After 76 days, Wuhan's lockdown was over. The victory in Wuhan convinced China that the pandemic could be contained at a relatively low cost in terms of time and resources. Over the 3 years that followed, the experience gained and measures adopted in Wuhan were embraced and perfected. From April 2020 to March 2022, the number of COVID-19 infections in China was consistently among the lowest in the world. Rural areas have limited medical resources and relatively fewer doctors, but of the 100 cluster outbreaks in China over the past 3 years, only a few occurred in rural areas. What shielded the 500 million strong rural population? Strict prevention measures.
减少人员交叉感染，有效切断病毒传染途径，根据中华人民共和国传染病法。
In this small village in southwestern Yunnan province, residents are required to wear a mask, and everyone entering is screened using the health code app.
测下体温，叫他们登记下那个，就是自己扫下码，填下那个健康申请表给人的。
If a COVID-19 outbreak occurs nearby, the villagers will be asked to stay at home, and all recreational facilities will be closed.
口罩戴起，不出门个，聚会也不聚了。现在我们就家里面自己家，在那都不弄。
Millions of community workers and volunteers, and 1.4 billion ordinary people, enthusiastically committed themselves to the fight against the epidemic, from medical staff to couriers, from ordinary people who always did a PCR test when required, to neighbors who shared anti-epidemic supplies. Everyone believed that if they made an effort and worked together, COVID-19 could be defeated.
大妈，早上起蒸的包子我给您搁桌子上啊。
Zhong Nanshan, a top Chinese expert on respiratory diseases, estimated that from early 2020 to December 2022, the COVID-19 death rate on the Chinese mainland was less than 1/200th of the global average and almost 1/900th that of the US. So, in effect, nearly 20 million lives were saved. The success of epidemic control during this period benefited the Chinese economy, which exhibited strong resilience. This is Zhengzhou, a city in central China. It's the site of the world's largest production base of Apple mobile phones. With 200,000 employees and 90 production lines, it turns out 130 million mobile phones, 50% of Apple's global output every year. At no point in 2020 or 2021 was production here ever interrupted, ensuring a timely supply of phones for Apple fans around the world.
以我们这个车间为例，我们这个车间大概是2000人，整个厂区有几十个车间在满负荷的在运营，每年要为生产大约上亿只产品，来满足客户和全球各地的需求。
Over the past 3 years, in spite of global instability, the pandemic, and a domestic slowdown, China has still managed to achieve average GDP growth of 4.5% annually. In 2021, China's GDP grew by 8.1% over the previous year to reach $17.7 trillion, ranking second globally and making it one of the fastest growing major economies in the world. Not only the Chinese government, but also the vast majority of people in China were convinced that, compared with the herd immunity approach of Western countries, an active policy of targeted prevention and control and dynamic zero COVID was the most effective way of eradicating the epidemic.
但是就我个人来言的话，可能没有太大的影响，除了出于安全考虑，我可能不会在外面乱溜达。
客流量是很大的，每天这边没有特别的那啥，没有太大的影响。
It's a lot better than last year. Everything get back to normal. I think not only in Beijing, I think most of the cities. We're from a different city.
Looks back to normal. It looks like there's because we're in China and not in other countries, and COVID is not really not bad right now. So it just feels like there's no problem.
This is the Institute for Viral Disease Control and Prevention, the place where the development of a Chinese vaccine began. Here on January the 7th, 2020, Chinese scientists for the first time captured the culprit of the pandemic under an electron microscope. A typical corona-shaped virus with a crown of outer particles. On January the 10th, Chinese scientists shared the gene sequencing of the virus with the world.
这种共享就为各国就说这个研究吧或预防控制赢得了时间。
Based on the information shared by China, the US quickly began work on developing its first mRNA vaccine. Around the world, scientists responded with unprecedented speed and urgency. On March the 16th, 2020, a medical team in Wuhan became the first research group in the world to begin clinical trials of a vaccine.
然后自己本身也是武汉人，因为之前看到新闻就觉得自己挺无能为力的，然后这次看到那个志愿者招募，我想着自己一定要报名尽一份力。接种的整个过程当中，其实没有过多的一些什么害怕呀或者担心，反而觉得挺兴奋的。兴奋的是看到了希望。
As of March 2023, China had administered over 3.49 billion COVID-19 vaccine doses. Now, more than 90% of the population are fully vaccinated. While accelerating the vaccination of its 1.4 billion people, China also began to provide and manufacture COVID vaccines overseas. In many of the recipient countries, the national leaders personally show the way in the vaccination campaign.
习近平总书记从一开始就指出说，疫苗是国际公共产品。世卫组织也一直倡导，在疫苗的问题上，专利也好，产权也好，就号召大家要把这个放弃，大家一定要联合起来，不光是中国人民联合起来，全世界人民。 要联合起来。
In order to meet the huge demand at home and abroad, China was the first country to designate COVID-19 vaccines as global public goods. China also took the lead in giving up the intellectual property rights and conducting joint production with developing countries. As of June 2022, China has transferred the relevant technology to or co-produce vaccines with more than 20 countries, creating an annual production capacity of 1 billion doses of COVID-19 vaccines overseas and providing over 2.2 billion doses to more than 120 countries and international organizations.
We're sure that it is safe and also good efficacy. We are confident in that.
In the 3 years since the fight against the virus began in Wuhan, China has been upgrading its medical infrastructure and has added nearly 120,000 ICU beds. The number of ICU doctors has increased by nearly a third, and that of ICU nurses has doubled. In 2022 alone, the number of ICU beds increased by over 110,000. In less than a year, ICU beds per 100,000 people in China surpassed that of developed countries such as Britain, Japan, Spain, and France. In rural areas, investment in medical equipment and personnel has been significantly strengthened. All these efforts are geared towards guaranteeing the effective operation of the integrated medical care system in which community hospitals and township health centers play a key role. This is a suburban township in Chongqing Municipality, southwest China. This 10-month-old baby, suffering from a persistent cough, was rushed to the Wujia Town Health Center.
就只是发烧了哈，就得吃点药就好了，好了就一直就相当于有点咳。
我们在农村在基层和老百姓说白了，大家都是比较熟悉了，有一种啥子叫医患感情了，应该说是大家是熟人，好，不管大人还是娃娃，我一般有时候能够现在他们现在哈有时候就把那气病就缓解了，他们思想顾虑就没得了。
By the end of 2021, China had almost 1 million primary-level medical and healthcare institutions nationwide, including 35,000 township health centers and nearly 600,000 village clinics. There were more than 1 million village doctors in China. In the past few years, the country has succeeded in ensuring that even the remotest rural areas are served by a doctor. As the virus evolved and new variants appeared, the authorities issued a series of protocols and treatment plans.
通过这3年给我们应该是提供了3个非常关键的窗口期。那第一个疫苗，就我们的全民的这种接种率达到了一个非常高的一个水平。第二个呢，就是病毒的最初的它的这种致病力非常高到现在的这种致病力的逐渐的下降。第3个非常关键的窗口期，我觉得就是药物的研发。那现在大家国外这个包括我们国家都有一些针对新冠的这种小分子的这种抗病毒的药物。我想通过这3年，大大的提升了我们的医疗救治能力和针对这种突发公共卫生事件的这种应急这种处置的这种能力。
Now, scientists in South Africa are warning of a new strain of COVID-19.
Well, as we've been hearing, the World Health Organization tonight classed this latest mutation as a variant of concern, giving it the name Omicron.
中国内地首次检出了新冠病毒奥密克戎变异株，是来自天津。
浦东新区全区均为封控区或管控区，暂时没有防范区。
The emergence of the Omicron strain put China's COVID control policy under greater pressure than ever before. Studies showed Omicron infects the human body around 70 times faster than all previous COVID-19 strains, although the symptoms are much less severe.
从目前的这个统计的这个传播指数的数据来看，应该它是超过了这个麻疹病毒，应该是人类有史以来它的传播能力最强的一种呼吸道病毒。
At the end of March 2022, Shanghai was hit by a massive Omicron surge. The city, with a population of 25 million, was placed under strict quarantine, which would last for 75 days. Subsequently, frequent mass COVID testing became the new norm across China, along with increasingly strict policies for checking travel records and scanning health kits.
像大规模核酸筛查这种行程码、健康码，就是出量码，这些其实也就是这1年来这个熟悉的场景了其实在前2年的时候并没有像这个样子。从2020年1月10号以来我们国家就是新增本土新冠病例是0天数有250天在全市每秒钟7例这种新冠感染患者的这种情况下，这250天其实是非常不易的
Against all the odds, Shanghai managed to contain Omicron. But with the onset of winter, the variant spread to other parts of China. The economy and everyday life, which had been running smoothly for over 2 years, were facing a serious challenge. The dynamic zero-COVID policy was coming under unprecedented pressure. People began to wonder about the differences between Omicron and previous variants.
这个奥密克戎它的特点就是传染性强，传播力强，就是一传好多人阳性了。实际上，真正需要去住院或者需要住在 ICU 的这个比例还是低。大概我也统计了一下，比方说我这2家定点医院，就是我把它重性和危重性都算上，占到3%到4%。
第一个还就是病原体的它的致病力，确实是发生了明显的变化，在下降。第二一点，我们整个中国人的主动免疫的这个水平在明显的提升，像我们的疫苗的接种，特别是对老年人的一些高危人群的疫苗接种比例达到了一定的要求。这个疫情到2022年年底的时候，它有几个方面的变化，我们感觉是可以进一步的实行优化调整的时机了。
It was time for a change. On November 10th, 2022, President Xi Jinping chaired a meeting of the Standing Committee of the CPC Political Bureau. It was at this meeting that the decisions was taken to optimize China's COVID prevention and control measures.
就说这个病毒，我们是无法把它消灭掉的，尤其是这个奥密克戎变异株，一个人传20多人，它的这个传播力这么快，让它不感染，几乎是不可能的，全世界没有任何一个国家做到的。那么在这种情况下，我们就必须要做出一个抉择。
On December 7th, 2022, China rolled out 10 new measures aimed at optimizing epidemic prevention and control. In particular, COVID-19 patients would no longer be sent to quarantine. For the first time in almost 3 years, there was no mention of the dynamic zero-COVID policy.
当前疫情防控的工作重心从防控感染转到医疗救治，强化重点人群的健康监测和服务保障。
Following the adjustment, individuals infected with COVID-19 were no longer required to be quarantined. And terms such as close contact and risk area were no longer deemed relevant. The introduction of Class B management officially terminated the legal grounds for mass quarantine. During the November to mid-February peak in COVID cases, more than 200,000 new ICU beds were added across the country. Almost 800,000 seriously ill people were treated. Online searches for fever, positive, cough, and other keywords related to COVID-19 and its symptoms peaked in mid to late December 2022. Thanks to 3 years of effective preparations, this epidemic tide quickly subsided.
还是现在比之前的还是要准备的要充分很多。一个是物资充分，一个心理对他没有不像以前的一种恐惧感对他的认识更加的深刻。治疗了解
更加的深入。还有一个就是中国的这一种救治的理念，可能跟国外有时候也不太一样，因为国外他们80岁的时候，很多人就不插管了，对吧？但是中国不会，就我们仍然是人民至上，生命至上。
现在的感染，在我们国家来看，还是处在零星的、局部性的散发状态。从疫情本身的特点来看，可以说，这个疫情已经基本结束。
Now, under the new COVID policy, the Chinese economy is quickly recovering. Foxconn in Zhengzhou, whose production was eventually hit by the Omicron outbreak, is quickly recovering. With the help of the local government, Foxconn's production base in Zhengzhou was able to restore output to its earlier peak level within a month.
我们这个园区是负责郑州总保区里面手机生产零件的全部进口和配送作业。目前呢，每天进货量达到180车次以上，往生产车间配送呢达到240车次以上，已经达到了历史的一个峰值。
Shipments out of the factory have already reached 90% of their peak level in early 2022. The factory is staffed by a full complement of 200,000 employees, and all its production lines are running at full capacity.
目前，我们要利用这一段时间，以最短的时间和最快的速度，把我们之前失去的时间和订单追回来。目前订单量也是我们以前的最高的水平，一直到春节乃至春节后的一段时间，都是我们生产的高峰。
At the start of the new year, all over China, business plans were being drawn up and deals done. Provinces and municipalities held key meetings, and officials conducted field trips where they assigned key tasks for the year ahead, making sure that 2023 got off on the right foot. An all-out economic recovery battle was starting all over the country.
大家有没有信心？有。
刚才张总说过了，我们现在一个产线，新的一年其实产值目标是要求是比较高的。
Businesses across the country were eagerly waiting to welcome back their workers. In the country's manufacturing hubs, many companies have already secured orders for the whole year ahead.
整个新能源行业，特别是我们所处的这个储能行业，订单呢应该是爆发增长。
Xu Xiaoyu's company, which produces energy storage battery systems, has a full book of foreign orders until March 2024. The surge in demand has created a shortage of some 200 frontline workers. They're planning to visit the hometowns of potential employees even during Spring Festival, as part of a recruitment drive.
我们主要还是想就是招一批就是年龄合适的、稳定的一个一线的产业工人。我们23年整个一个订单呢，按照我们年前的一个排摸嘛，包括我们的一个客户下订单，可能会有数倍的增长。
To help companies find the right workers, local governments have swung into action, organizing trips to other provinces to recruit workers during Spring Festival.
贵州的200多万务工人员也带着爱心礼包，陆续登上返岗直通车，前往广东、浙江、福建、海南等地。安徽芜湖的新春招聘会吸引了357家企业报名参会。
Securing economic growth has become China's top priority.
我国首条跨海高铁福厦高铁建设也进入了冲刺阶段。春节后的第一个工作日，3000多名建设者在大连；春节过后的首个工作日，有23个新项目同步开工。
I'm expecting a solid growth number for 2023. That'll be good for China. Importantly, in a world where growth will be challenged,
The International Monetary Fund predicts that China's economic growth will rise to 5.2% in 2023.
You know, 1/3 of the global economy was potentially likely to go into recession this year. China coming back into the economy will actually help reduce much of that pressure.
Less than 2 months after Jeremy Jurgens made this assessment, widespread fears of a new round of global financial turmoil erupted. This followed the collapse on March the 10th of Silicon Valley Bank in the US, brought about by the Federal Reserve's series of rapid interest rate hikes. The struggling global economy is in dire need of a stable growth engine. For investment, trade, and tourism, the world is looking to China.
As China grows faster, it buys more goods from other countries. So that's a spillover effect. So it lifts up other countries' growth. We found when China grew 1 percentage point faster, that other countries' growth picked up by 0.3 percentage points.
And one of the biggest beneficiaries of the new COVID policy is China's movie industry. People have been flooding back to the cinemas. Box office receipts during the 7-day holiday totaled $1 billion, the second highest figure ever for a spring festival period. And travel has also bounced back. In the same 7 days, over 300 million passenger journeys were recorded on the country's transport network, generating revenue of $56 billion for the tourism industry, a 30% year-on-year increase.
3月15号，中国公民团队出境游的目的地将从20个变成60个。那与此同时呢，中国恢复审发外国人各类赴华签证，与世界双向奔赴。
The message is clear. China is back in business, and the ripple effects of China's economic rebound will be felt around the world.
"疫情也好，它终究有一天会结束的，危机时变转机时。
其实国家把我们保护得很好。
好像我觉得很多专家也这样预测，病毒将是我们人类最大的一个挑战。希望就是形成一个共同的合力来去解决这样的一个疾患的。我想以后如果真的有发生这种情况的话，我们能够集中力量共同去攻克它，解决它。
大家希望过上一个更加红红火火的日子。